Okay, great. I'd like to call to order the Conservation Advisory Council meeting for the town of Niskayuna. This is the January 8th, 2025 meeting. Laura, could you please call the roll?
Okay, online we have Georgia Murray Montan, Joy Wang.
Here.
Joy Wang. Here, Chuck Petrowski's here, Ashok Ramasubramanian's here, and Chairman Dartstrayer.
Great. Okay, we have some minutes in our agenda, the November 6th, 2024 minutes. Does anybody have any comments concerning those minutes? Hearing none, I will make a motion to accept the minutes as written. Do I have a second?
I was not here at that meeting, so I have to abstain.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of adopting the minutes, say yay. Yay.
Yay.
Any opposed?
Yeah. Aye. Yeah.
Okay, hearing none. The minutes-
Chuck will
And then I have to abstain, yeah.
and-
Okay.
Okay, December minutes, and that's the December 4th meeting. Were there any comments on the meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none, I make a motion that we adopt the minutes as written. Good. Second? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? There were no abstentions, so the motion carries. Okay. Do we have anybody for privilege of the floor online? Or,
Yeah, we have no online or emails for tonight.
okay, great. Okay, that leads us to our first order of business, the EAF, and this is EAF 2025-01. And this is a PUD, Planned Unit Development application by Niskayuna Harbors. And this property is located along the Mohawk, and the developer is asking for a PUD. Now, PUD has certain requirements. It's usually a large parcel, 50 acres or more. And what it allows the developer to do is have more flexibility in the development. And it also opens up the number or types of uses that are available on that property. And it also allows a higher density, if I recollect right.
It may. Yeah, it may. I don't think we typically use it as a higher density tool though.
No, okay. So, the proposed property is right by this River's Ledge, which was developed several years ago. So it is to the west of the property. I believe it's about 47 acres, and it's on the river itself. There are a lot of wetlands on this particular property, and part of the property along the river will be given to the town as part of this development as parkland, and I believe it includes the old canal bed, which is no longer filled, but is there. It's water anyway. And there is a series of comments that are made by the developer. And I don't know, Laura, if you wanted to add anything else to this?
Just that process-wise, this is at the very beginning stages. They haven't even been allowed to submit to the formal application yet. Their first step is to get approval from the town board to submit the application.
Mhm.
So what the town is conceptually looking at is the underlying zoning here is R2 medium density residential. So you could theoretically have single family homes again in this spot. But the planned unit development would allow the flexibility to develop it with the condos. And So the board can ask questions and just start thinking about it, but we have no formal action today. Planning board is gonna look at it on Monday, and then the town board will have to actually authorize the application. But what we're looking at conceptually is, would a plan unit development make sense, and would we even allow the application for this parcel right now?
What is in the 41 acres? What is in there right now? Do we have aerials?
I don't know that there's a existing map in this packet yet.
If
'cause
you, it's
very
primarily
conceptual.
wooded though, I think.
But
if
it's
you look-
primarily wooded. So everything is forest. There's an open pond right now that you can actually see from the Mohawk Hudson Bike Hike Trail. And then there's an existing house right here. If you guys can see that little, right along
Yeah.
Aqueduct Road. This is an existing house. It's very well taken care of, super cute. And then there's a existing house here. It is actually on the map. It's this little thing. This one is vacant and abandoned. It's actually owned by the person who is making the proposal here. And so the proposal would be to take down that house. But with the exception of taking down that house, it's mostly currently forest.
So since at least some of us in this committee have seen the results from the comprehensive plan survey, where the town residents have placed such a high premium on protecting existing green space, it raises some concerns for me on behalf of the residents.
Yeah, just the not really comparing a single family home development to a condo development, but just development of the parcel at all because it's
Yeah.
a large tract of open
It's
space.
a large
Yeah.
tract of open space, and since the residents have expressed such a strong preference for preserving existing open space. Wait, did I show you my text analysis of the of Q20? And I did, right?
Yeah, I think we looked at that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually, just because we're just talking conceptually now, I'm just gonna show you an aerial so you can get a better sense of it. But you guys can keep talking. And I completely understand that. Actually, Rivers Ledge is kind of a different discussion because Rivers Ledge was a version of an, already existing
Mm-hmm.
junkyard. They really didn't take down that many trees except for the second building, or the phase 2 building. So I'm gonna zoom in a little. It always looks bigger on my screen. Here's Rivers Ledge. Well, let's start here. Here's the traffic circle, boathouse, and the park. Here's Rivers Ledge. This is the property that we're talking about right here.
Yeah, it's fully forested, and I would like to see like a proper comment period where the town residents are allowed to comment on the development, and and given a chance to comment on the benefits versus drawbacks, because that looks like some pristine forest, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are at least informal hiking trails in there that residents who use the bike path may be using.
And Laura, where is Aqueduct Park in relation to that? Sorry.
Aqueduct Park is right here.
Oh,
Here's
okay.
the rowing docks. Here's the new trails that Rivers Ledge kind of built so you can
Right.
walk along the river here. These are all public. One of the things that,
Okay.
we're sort of talking about is that you could probably extend that public walkway, even if it has to be on raised
Right.
planks or something because there's so much wetland through here. There are there is like a 4-wheeler trail in here somewhere. I don't know if you can see it on the map. The only thing to remember, because Ashok, I completely share your like original, observation that that's forest, and in my mind, it would be the most beneficial to stay forest.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it is private property with an underlying development right. So
Mm-hmm.
we'd have to figure out. It's not necessarily up to the town to say you can't develop without offering some kind of a incentive, like we always talked about. It
Mm-hmm.
would be up to the town to say, if you're going to develop, what's the kind of development that we'd like to see there. Or if you're not going to if you're not going to develop, you really have to have some kind of thing like we've talked about, like the town buying the property, or, because I think in this situation, you're not going to get a developer that just says, oh, it is so much nicer as a forest. Like, why don't I keep it that way?
Okay, I understand. That's a valid point.
The current zoning is R2, you said? You said the
Yes,
underlying is
so-
R2?
Yeah, because this parcel, in the 1980s was originally rezoned to R2
What was
for
it
a
prior to that?
PUD. Prior to that, it was a industrial,
Yeah.
same zoning as River's Ledge.
Hmm.
It was, because in the 70s, all of the lands along the river were basically zoned industrial.
Right.
But in the 80s, they rezoned this piece because it's called Niskayuna Harbor, because in the 1980s, it had a plan to basically carve out a harbor here, put a restaurant and a hotel down by the river, and put a large number of residential units. And that PUD was approved, but obviously never acted on. So the PUD expired. But as far as I could tell, the zone change doesn't expire. Once it's zoned R2, it stays. So they have the ability to do medium density R2 development, potentially. And then having a conversation with them about preserving the land, I think that's always great.
Is there a public hearing that the town board will have?
Not so, no. So this is just the very first step. And what the town board is going to look at when they're considering whether or not to allow a PUD application, in my mind, is whether or not they'd like to see traditional development on that parcel, which would be the single family homes, which is a straight up allowable use, or if they would like to see the diversity of housing, like the condos, because essentially the reason for allowing somebody to make a PUD application is to allow the diversity in housing. My sense is that if we're weighing single family homes against condominiums, the town could certainly use the condominiums. Allowing the application doesn't mean that the configuration that you see in your packet is going to stay and the number of units is going to stay. The wetland regulations just changed. So even the buffer on the wetlands may get a lot bigger. The step that's before the town right now is just whether or not to allow an application for a PUD. But I think, getting back to Ashok's original point, what the developer is saying right now is, I want to develop this parcel. And they're submitting a application for a PUD. So,
And in their application, they are saying only using 27% of the PUD, so it's not using the full area.
they have to reserve a lot of the wetland areas. So this kind of gets back to the conversation we've had before, because a lot of the area that they're preserving is wetland area. So we have to make sure that they're actually preserving, but there's like a pocket of upland forest here. This is all in the floodplain down here, because the river can basically flood up until the edge of this parcel, but there's a fair amount of non-wetland delineated forest down here.
For perspective, this is where the power lines come across
Here.
Aqueduct
Mhm,
and
yeah.
the Mohawk.
Yeah.
So where is it with respect to the old trolley line? Does the old trolley line go through there as well?
No, the old trolley. Well, yeah, the old trolley line is the old Mohawk Hudson Bike Hike Trail, right? That's-
No, there was one that crossed the river.
Oh, there's one across.
You can still see
Yeah,
the
maybe. Is this the old
piers.
trolley? Yeah, that's the old trolley line then, right?
Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay, so it is. It's right on the edge then. Or is that the power lines?
I don't
No, those are the piers, I think.
They look like piers though, yeah. I was just trying to get more oriented.
Yes, I'm not sure about the trolley line. This is the entrance to the Jackson demolition.
Mm-hmm.
Goes up the hill.
Yep.
This is the footprint of where the senior center building is going for Rivers Ledge.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I mean, if like the houses are all clustered in here, all of this remains forest in the arc around it.
So when they indicate zone change to PUD, that should be incorrect, right? Because zoning stays R2.
No, PUD is kind of like an overlay zoning. So it is essentially putting a zoning district over top of the existing zoning district. Yeah, but you need the underlying R2 zoning district in order to apply for a PUD. So when they originally applied, the underlying zoning was industrial, which doesn't allow for a PUD. PUDs are, basically a residential tool, so it doesn't make sense to allow them in industrial zone. So in the 1980s, they rezoned it to R2 and then put the overlay zoning for a PUD on it. The overlay zoning expired because they never broke ground. The underlying zoning didn't go away.
There was an objective in the comp plans to make sure that the industrial zoning got changed. in this
Stop
area.
reading loudly for a minute. I want to.
Georgia, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to ask a quick question. If we agree to allow for the development as a PUD, will we have any input with where the set aside of land is, where the undeveloped land will be?
Yeah.
So that we can get, okay.
Yeah. Really, the only thing that's being asked right now is, kind of, does the town want to see a traditional single family home development there, or are they willing to consider the condos? In my mind, forest is number one, but if we have no control over forest, in my mind, we have a pretty high amount of single family zoning in our town already, and we have a very low amount of condominiums, and condominiums are a good way for people to age in place and stay in Niskayuna, live along the river. The difference between Rivers Ledge and this, Rivers Ledge is renting the high rental price, and you can't build any equity in your unit, where a condominium you don't own any of the outside, but you own the inside. So there's
Absolutely.
definitely some benefit, I think, to seeing condos as the development instead of single family homes.
I agree with you there, Laura, absolutely. And it would be better if they're like the smaller unit condos, in my mind, than like a 2 or 3 story high-rise condo, but that may just be me.
Yeah, I mean, the plan really hasn't been vetted at all yet, because it has to get approved by the town board to even be allowed to apply. But they're basically
Right.
at the point now where they've submitted, and they are asking the town board to say, yeah, it's okay for you to apply. And then you can see they've already filled out the EAF. So obviously then if the town board says go on ahead, apply, then they start working on the sketch plan and the site plan, and you guys have to, look at the secret impacts and all that stuff. The reason it's on the agenda now is you guys only meet once a month. It's a big project, and they wanted you guys to be aware of it so you can start thinking of it. And when you're driving by, you can kind of peek your head into the forest and see, what you're thinking
Yeah,
about
I,
it.
That makes sense. Like you, I'm concerned about the forest, especially, 80% of the black bear population in the is in the Adirondacks for New York State, which is close to where we are, where we quote unquote fall into southern Adirondacks versus northern Adirondacks. So, keeping an eye towards the wildlife corridors, I think would be, number one.
Yeah, when I look at this and the question of PUD comes up, and I agree with you, Ashok, preserving the whole piece would be definitely a key win for the town of Niskayuna. But I think the objectives that if a PUD is granted here, we should try to preserve as much open space as possible in the development. I think that the housing option should be selected in a way that the neighborhoods have diversity of housing and maintain character. I think seeing 40 condos with the same facade or elevation would not be a good thing here. I think appropriate commercial development integrated into that area, like what was done with Rivers Ledge, might be helpful here. And then the other thing would be is that the waterfront, it would be great if the town had access or docking space, if it's possible, with the waterfront and or some sort of development consistent with the Schenectady County waterfront plan that was put out, I think, put out like in the late 2000s.
I have it.
Yeah, because I think one of the things is that's a big recreational asset to the town. And it was interesting when I took my boat ride through the Erie Canal in Western New York, the way that the towns have integrated the canal into the community was really beneficial, both for the community, but also for the people using the river. So this is a good opportunity to maybe achieve some of those objectives with the PUD.
Do you have a question, Chad?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. No, all good. This is my question relates to you brought it up there, the Erie Canal, and which is celebrating its 200th anniversary of the completion. So please be aware of the celebrations up and down the Erie Canal this year. Are there any laws, rules, or regulations around building so close to the former Erie Canal?
Yeah, it does have to get the State Historic Preservation. I don't know what the O stands for. Organization, SHPO.
SHPO, yeah.
It does have to get the SHPO approvals in order
Okay.
to build there. Rivers Ledge got them though, so it's probably likely that SHPO would say yes. I mean, they're a state organization and they have to do their review, and they would have to do like sort of like literally like archaeological test pits and stuff at this point
Right.
to double check things. Yeah, it would need a historic preservation approval from the state.
I
Thank
would
you.
imagine the canal here, though, is probably in better shape than it was in Rivers Ledge.
Because of the junkyard?
Yeah.
Yeah, the canal's all filled in. So Rivers Ledge had the aqueduct stones piled up in piles along the edge, but no one could see them. You'd have to sort of go into the forest in order to see the piles. And then they, Rivers Ledge pulled those piles out and made them into walls so that people can see the old aqueduct stones. They're like retaining walls now. But I think if you were to walk it, it's very flat, but you're just basically walking on top of the old canal. It's all filled in.
Yeah, I mean, at that location, the canal is higher than the river.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's why actually I was telling you, the other side of the canal is in the floodplain. The canal itself is outside of the floodplain. It's that much higher than the river.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking like 12, 15 feet higher than the river. Maybe even more than that.
Is there any impact on the bike path?
Yes, it has a crossing, which is included in the packet. And right now there is no crossing on the bike path, so adding another crossing requires the approval of the New York State Parks. And the other thing that was in your packet was their submittal to the New York State Parks to see if they would be willing to grant another crossing of the bike path. They're saying that this crossing can be at grade. Rivers Ledge crossings, the bike path had to be built up on either side because they were a little bit higher. So if anybody remembers what the bike path looked like before Rivers Ledge, it was a little bit flatter.
Mhm.
Now you have like the hill, especially on the second entrance from the traffic circle, it sort of goes up, then you cross the road, and then it goes back down again. This one is supposed to be at grade, so you wouldn't have to touch the bike path. But you would need to have Whenever you put a new crossing in, the cars are required to yield to the bike path. So in the crossing packet, you can see they have a stop sign for the cars on either side. So it has the least impact to the people bicycling. That's the same way the Rivers Ledge ones are. But every time you put a crossing on a bike path, there's an impact.
So in terms of feedback from the CAC, to the planning board or the town board, like I would, summarize like Chairman Strayer did, like, for the PUD, the CAC would like as much of the green space protected as possible. And this would be in line with the resident feedback expressed in the comprehensive planning survey.
And I would also like to have some clarification because I found some inconsistencies in this report. So in their brief paragraph of description, they said only 11.2 acres of 41.5 will be disturbed. And then a few pages later, it's 12.5 and 41.6, which is different. And then in the table they provided land uses and the coverage types on the property site. So they stated 40.5 acres of forest space, and then 20.5 will be changed.
Okay.
So that's more than half.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah, that right there is why we need mathematicians.
Clarify disturbed space. Thank you, Joy. I did not catch that, so it's really helpful.
So the table is on page 9.
Yeah.
Here it says, here it says open space proposed 18.85 acres, 46% of the total.
Laura, I can't remember, but are in the PUD ordinance, is there a preamble that talks about some of the goals of a PUD?
Oh yeah, there is. Yeah, we'll check the math and make sure that they've got it all right. Yeah, I was actually going there when you guys were talking, and then I got distracted from it. Okay, so the purpose of a planned unit development is to encourage flexibility in design and development of land in order to promote its most appropriate use, to facilitate adequate and economical provisions of streets and utilities, to preserve the natural and scenic qualities of open space, and to encourage and compatibility with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive land use plan. Large-scale residential developments that are planned, designed, and developed to function as integral units independent of adjacent building sites.
Is that town code or state code?
That is town code. So they like to see a maximum choice in housing, environment, and type. They like to see more usable open space and recreational areas. They like to see a development pattern which preserves outstanding natural topography and geological features, scenic vistas, and trees, and prevents the disruption of natural drainage patterns. To see efficient use of land resulting in a smaller network of utilities and streets, and development pattern in harmony with the land use intensity, transportation facilities, and community facility objectives of the comprehensive land.
Okay, so that's very helpful, and what all that we have been discussing and summarizing, it's quite consistent with the town code.
Yeah, and they're basically just right here. The applicant shall apply in writing to the town board and petition such board to consider allowing them to make a formal application for the creation of a planned unit development. So that's just this one little paragraph. Then they would go to sketch plan approval. Then they go to tentative zoning approval. Then they come back for final site plan approval to the planning board. So essentially there's sort of like 4 cracks at reviewing it. And the first one is just whether or not to allow the application at all. It doesn't mean that it necessarily has to look like what they've
Understood.
attached. It just means whether or not you would allow it.
No, and going back to the point Joy raised, like, there's a big difference between, what is it, Joy, 41%?
So they listed 40.5 acres of forest space, and
Okay.
then 20.5 will be affected, will
Okay,
be taken out.
okay,
And versus in their description, they said only 11.2 acres of 41.5 acres will be disturbed.
okay. Obviously, from the CAC perspective, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, we would want more conservation.
Yeah, they are taking over half of the forest space.
That's this table right here.
Which doesn't match what they
Have in there.
described.
Mhm. Yeah, that consistency needs to be clarified.
And the added lawn space shouldn't be considered any forested or open space if they were thinking of that.
So the comments that we've been making, Laura, do they get to the planning board or they get to the town board or both?
Yeah, so the planning board, I said, is looking at it for the first time on Monday.
Okay,
They would they have a very short time to recommend application, because again, we're not deciding on where number of units, buildings, anything like that, just allowing them, just the concept of a PUD. So they have to do their turnaround pretty quickly, so they would probably make a recommendation to the town board by the end of January, and then it goes to the town board for February. So I would put the CAC's comments and give them to the planning board, and then when it gets presented to the town board, I usually do go over what the boards have said at that point.
Okay, the way I would put it is that this is a unique property near the Mohawk River, and the parcel itself has significant value to the town. And I think what I said before is preserve open space. Preserve, I would add the aesthetic qualities as much as possible. And then I would go to the housing development, commercial development where, if appropriate, and then the waterfront development is a key feature. And I would tie it to the 2008 plan, because this is one of the last parcels, I think, right along the river that we could meet that objective.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying what that has to look like, but voting access should be one of those, I would think.
Yeah, I've seen proposals that showed a boat launch on this, but what I have heard is that it's on the inside curve of the river and it tends to accumulate fine sediment. So it is not the greatest place to have a boat launch. But that is just what I've heard. We definitely should look at it, ask them to look at access, see what it would take, because we only have the kayak launch at Aqueduct Park, so it'd definitely be nice if there was another place that we could have actual boat launching. There's boat launching on Lock 7, but that can be very clogged up by the water chestnut.
Mhm.
So it would be just interesting and important to look and see if this is another opportunity.
Mhm. I think that was one of the things that has been brought up multiple times in the town, is the lack of access to the river for boaters.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's called Niskuna Harbor. Originally it was a harbor, but they've removed the harbor part of it.
Well, I would imagine right now, if they were proposing the harbor, it'd be a lot more destructive to the natural environment.
Probably.
Laura and everyone, this is
Yeah.
George. I just have another question / suggestion as you look at the town planning as part of your town planning. When I was younger, we used to be able to swim in the river, but it would be great if there is a point where we could gain access to the river for swimming. I don't know if this would be an appropriate location, but you're speaking about boat launches, maybe that's something that can be looked at as well.
Yeah, even if we don't really recommend swimming in it now, although I don't necessarily think that's true, there isn't a lot of swimming, but I think it's okay. Is in the future, if it gets even cleaner, there could be a definite demand for that
When it gets cleaner.
when it gets cleaner.
That's right.
So my, town engineer says that the time not to swim in the Mohawk is like after storms and stuff, because combined sewer and storm overflow still go into the Mohawk when there's a lot of water coming down from the sky. But in times when there hasn't been a big storm or anything, the Mohawk is pretty clean. That's what he told me.
All right. Well,
He's an
thanks for letting me know. I'm going to take that with a grain of salt and look for the future. Look toward the future when it's even cleaner.
People do go swimming in it though, because I've kayaked.
My daughter
um,
swims in it sometimes.
I have kayaked west of Schenectady, and there are people that are swimming in that Mohawk.
In the summer, sometimes my daughter jumps off the kayaking docks accidentally.
Accidentally.
Yeah.
And there's people that actually have like docks with boards and stuff on them
Mhm.
go off.
Mhm.
People do that.
Okay.
I have another
Yeah.
comment, or they can address. So they provided a table for existing trail usage. Is that to their advantage to do that? Because their data is from 20 years ago. So I wonder if they could update it if they do want to use it. Otherwise, 20 years old data might not be that accurate.
Oh, for the bike trail?
Yes.
For river sledge crossing.
Yeah, no, we definitely should have them update that, because I know there's more recent data than that. So the trail usage.
Yeah, it looks like they got the data from the
10 years
Rivers
ago.
Ledge project.
Yeah, I don't know if a survey was ever done at that location. I do know that Lions Park, it's very busy.
Well, and also, Rivers Ledge was approved pre-COVID, so I think the date of that submittal on Rivers Ledge is like 2019, maybe. And now you have 160 units right there, so the usage may be quite a bit different.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, I know I brought this up numerous times, but if we could ever get that railroad spur developed,
Mhm.
there would be a lot more use of that area, because we would connect all the apartments up on Hillside and Schwaber Drive, the homes there, and the new development that's gone in, and they'd all be able to connect and have access to that area.
That'd be great.
Working on it.
All right. Does anybody else have any other comments or suggestions that we can feed up to the boards? Again, we will be able to look at this again.
Wanted to quickly talk a little bit more about the bicycle crossings. Because if one attends the privilege of the floor in town board meetings, like pedestrian safety and vehicle speeding, people talk about it quite frequently. So if there's going to be an additional vehicular crossing, perhaps something like traffic calming, speed bumps or something, a stop sign is nice, right? But in a collision between a bicycle and an automobile, there's always only one clear winner and one clear loser. So, and, I wanted to make that point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So the stop sign is because it's meant to inconvenience the cars. Like the bike path was there first. The bikes have the right of way. But, I don't know how well behaved cars are with those stop signs, because if you live there and you cross 20 times and you never see a bicycle then you stop looking
Yeah,
as much. So
exactly.
yeah, I mean, I would totally be in favor of like a speed bump or something. I mean, it's meant to be inconvenient to cars to cross the bike path there.
And speaking as a biker, yeah, on the road crossings on the bike path in that section, I've had some, let's say, uncomfortable experiences with vehicular traffic.
At River's Ledge.
Not not reverse ledge particular, but when you bike towards Schenectady, there's a series of roads, right? There's an Anthony Street,
Yeah, there is.
and of course, like crossing even with the warning lights, crossing
Aqueduct.
Aqueduct,
that one's
that's
tricky.
that's very challenging. You have to run across and like ready to go, right?
Yeah.
And as is the case with all of our crosswalks, even though there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk and the lights are flashing and New York state law says you have to stop, they do not always stop.
There's also one other aesthetic thing that we should consider once the development gets developed, and that is that the town park overlooks this parcel. And right now, that view is really pristine, and it'll be very different. But I think that gets into lighting decisions, tree and shrubbery decisions, and stuff like that.
Mhm.
It's sort of the opposite of what generally people think, that if you put a development on a hilltop, people are worried about the aesthetics. We were certainly worried about the aesthetics in Environment One with their building.
Yeah, I remember that.
But this is sort of the opposite. You have a heavily used park, and you want to sort of protect some of the aesthetics there as well. Okay, Georgia, any other comments?
No, my primary, no,
Okay.
I'm good.
Anybody else have any comment? Any more comments? Okay, then I would suggest we move on to the discussion items.
Oh, these are really more of reports. I just don't really have a great place to put reports.
Okay.
In here, that's why they don't have agenda statements. 233 Troy Schenectady Road. We haven't gotten a formal revision since the last time it came to the CAC. So no updates, but I expect to have a formal submission on that soon.
That's the gas station.
That's the gas station on Route 7. And then 1356 Balltown Road did receive its preliminary subdivision approval, and will need to be going to the tree council and ARB and some of the other boards still for, the things that were outstanding, but that did get approved.
And that's CBS.
Yeah, that's between CVS and WRGB.
Yes.
Sorry, I have them all memorized, but it's very good to make sure that you ask.
Okay, great. So Laura, did you send out the memo to the board?
Yes, I did send out the memo.
Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about the short-term rental ordinance that we looked at last spring, and we formally reviewed at our September 4th meeting, I believe. And so that has worked its way through the process, and through that process, there have been some changes that were made to that ordinance. And in particular, some of the changes that were made was, if you recall, the original ordinance had this hosted and unhosted option for short-term rentals. And the hosted short-term rentals was basically available to all zoning districts in the town, residential districts. And then there was a second option, the unhosted rental option, and that was restricted to mixed areas, let's say RP, which is residential professional, or CN, commercial residential areas, because unhosted could be more of a commercial property or a business. And I know that this board, we were very concerned about the impact of the of the short-term rentals in the neighborhood. We did question a couple times about why it was in all districts as opposed to just certain districts, and we had that discussion. A couple other changes that were made was that if a piece of property had more than one building on the property, let's say, that only one of those buildings could be used as a short-term rental unit or property. So that would restrict, if there were multiple buildings on a particular property, what you could rent out. And that was removed. There were limits in the short-term rental ordinance that we looked at, and that had to do with the number of bedrooms that could be rented out, and it was limited and capped at 3. So if you say that there's 2 occupants per bedroom plus 1, that limited the number of occupants to 7 guests outside in a rental unit. And there was also a restriction on outside guests, that you couldn't invite outside guests. And the rationale behind that was that early on, there were some concerns that residents had that people would rent the house out for parties. And that would be impactful to the town. Now, there were some other things that have been relaxed. The parking has been relaxed a little bit. And I think there were some other things about who could enforce the, if there was a problem, was it a police enforcement or was it a town enforcement? And some of that has been changed. But what I did was I went back to the notes that I had, both the formal notes that we approved and the notes that I had taken during our meetings. And it became apparent to me that the short-term rental ordinance had been substantially changed. And if you look at the seeker process, if a project has substantial changes, it should be brought back to review for this committee. So what I did was I drafted up a memo, and you have a copy of the memo. I don't know if we want to read it.
Yeah, I'm trying to load it now. I'm having a hard time opening the Word document, but you can keep talking and I'll get it up and going.
And what this memo does is it basically talks, the first paragraph talks about the process that the short-term rental regulations were constructed, that basically best practices from a lot of different communities were used to basically develop the ordinance. And I'm talking primarily to the September 4th ordinance that was before the board. And I also talk about the concerns that the residents have raised, the concerns about the noise, the off-street parking, and the impact on the general neighborhood. And in the memo, it does acknowledge that we need an ordinance, because without an ordinance, the town doesn't have a lot of options. And I also acknowledge that the CAC supports an appropriate set of regulations specifically tailored to address Niskayuna's needs. Okay. But what I said was that while the 9-4 was a good compromise to meet those needs, the amended draft, which I'm calling the 12/17/2024 draft, would likely have negative and substantial negative, unintended and substantial negative impacts on the town's Niskayuna's neighborhoods. So that's basically the first 2 paragraphs. I'm just trying to basically set the stage with this memo.
So what material fact or facts changed from the old one to the new one?
Okay,
Yeah, that's what he just went through.
that's what I just went through.
The
The
host
was
hosted
removed from the ordinance, and the
Okay.
unhosted was allowed for all zoning districts.
hosted was removed from the ordinance, which means the owner of the house need not be present
Correct.
in order for the property to be rented,
Right.
a short-term rent like Airbnb or some such.
Yeah.
Also, you said the parking was relaxed and guests are now permitted.
Yes, and the number of guests. So like, for example, if you had a 7-bedroom house,
Mm.
which there are some in Niskayuna, with the modified ordinance, if that were to be adopted, you'd have 7 bedrooms, so you could have 15 people at the residence. In addition, you could invite guests as well. That is very different than I think the conversations that we had when we were looking at a hosted property with a maximum of 7 guests and no outside. 7 renters and
Okay.
no outside guests.
Okay. So now guests are, so what Laura's highlighting there, that's the old text,
No,
right?
this is what was changed. In Chairman
Hosted.
Schreier's memo, he is showing that these things have changed.
Now, what I'm showing here, yeah, let's go back and, so part of the idea.
I'm sorry, I got confused.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
sorry.
no. So part of the discussion here that we had at previous board meetings was the ability to rent a room, short-term rental, may improve affordability for housing, right? Because someone might not be able to afford the home. And it provides options for people. But that's for a hosted short-term rental, because the person is there and they're gaining a personal benefit in the neighborhood, potentially is gaining a compromise, but a benefit maybe as well. Once you put an unhosted Airbnb or an unhosted short-term rental somewhere, that now becomes a business. And later in the memo, I talk about how that could be owned by an investor or an investor group that has no real skin in the game, let's say, for the neighborhood. So that's actually a commercial business, other than just renting the property. But we can get to that. I'd like to just go through the memo all the way.
Okay, wait. I did not realize that the code I sent out to you guys didn't have the changes.
Okay.
So the changes are highlighted in red. That's what I thought I sent you guys. What I sent you guys was the original code. The removal of the hosted and unhosted distinction. That's highlighted in red. The removal that there would only be one short-term rental permit issued per property was removed. There was a removal that someone needs to be available to respond within an hour and be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because if there's something happening, we need to be able to contact them, and that part was removed. The removal of the number of bedrooms was removed in a different version, but can I just tell you that was actually not removed by the town board. The removal of the restriction on the number of bedrooms was removed by the town attorney's office because they believe it conflicts with a New York state law, which was reviewed by a bunch of attorneys. So we're not discussing the removal of the number of bedrooms.
Okay, well,
restriction.
we can change that. We can get
Yeah.
clarification on that.
This removal is that the building inspector is the one that's going to determine the number of bedrooms, not the assessor, and that's better for a lot of reasons. The building inspectors, they are just looking at different things when they're looking at buildings like egress and fire alarms and everything, and the assessor's just looking at what the value of the home is. So it's just better to have the building inspectors be the ones that determine the bedrooms. That's what that removal is. Then they removed the guests, which you talked about. They removed the limit on vehicles to correspond with the removal of the limit on bedrooms. And this is
Laura, sorry to interrupt. So
Yeah.
who is they in your sentence? Like who?
the town board.
Through a vote, through a majority vote, through like
Through the town board's resolution. This is the town board's resolution. 2024-292.
Is that in the stuff that you sent us to?
No, I sent you the old code.
Okay.
I think the way to look at this is, as this resolution went through the process, there were changes made, and the changes are substantial. So the question is has this gone from like limited impact to neighborhoods to more substantial impacts?
I'm inclined to think more substantial impacts, because I remember early on when this thing was being discussed, there was a lot of residents who were making like passionate pleas in the privilege of the floor about like partying and noise.
Mhm.
So whereas the old resolution seems to really address those residents' concerns, the new resolution effectively does not. I mean, if everything is unhosted, like the chairman says, like then, yeah, then it's a business. There's nothing preventing somebody from renting out a vacant house and it being used for like noisy parties and such.
Let me finish the memo part, and then I think it would be discussed, because I think I addressed a lot of concerns. Okay. Maybe, so then after just this introductory area and saying that best practices were used by the planning department for the Niskayuna ordinance, I'll just read it because I think it's going to be smoother. Because changes in land use are type 1 actions under seeker law, the town of Niskayuna asked the Conservation Board to review the proposed short-term rental ordinance for potential environmental, community, social, and economic impacts. This review process, the Conservation Advisory Board reviewed several ordinance drafts and made several suggestions, and that was the process that we followed in the spring. From the CAC's perspective, it was important that such regulations minimize environmental and neighborhood character impacts, protect affordable housing options for residents, and balance the potential neighborhood concerns with the town and resident economic benefits afforded by short-term rentals. Equally important to the CAC throughout this process was that any recommended short-term rental regulation supported objectives set forth in the Niskayuna Comprehensive Plan 2013. Specifically, as stated in the plan, and this is a paraphrase, the conversion from residential to commercial uses can have negative impacts on surrounding neighborhood properties. And then later in the document says, and it recommends protecting residential neighborhoods from commercial encroachment by ensuring that any expansion in commercial use in a residential neighborhood preserve the residential appearance and character of the neighborhood. So that, I think, is the key thing in the comp plan. In the next paragraph, I talk about the aspects of the 9/4/2024 draft and how those items met the above objectives. So the 9/4/2024 draft presented to the CAC by the town of Niskayuna met the above objectives and goals through the use of 1, hosted rentals permitted in all zoning districts; 2, restrictions on unhosted rentals to mixed commercial residential areas such as RP and CN. The committee did express, in parentheses I have, the committee did express concerns about unintended impacts, potentially reducing the availability of affordable housing caused by unhosted short-term rentals on affordable housings in these districts, referring to RP and CN. The third item is a strict limitation on the number of bedrooms to 3, maximum guests to 8. Restricting the number of rental units to 1 per property. Limitations of off-street parking and off-street parking to 4 spots, including one for the host. The committee was concerned about the addition of impervious pavement, providing a mechanism to quickly resolve complaints by allowing contact with law enforcement. When we talked about that, what I tried to do is I tried to capture what the committee's issues were and then how the September ordinance addressed those concerns. The next paragraph deals with the seeker process. So in the seeker determination process, the board evaluates project impacts by reviewing 18 questions or topic areas established by the Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC. For each of these areas, potential impacts, direct or indirect, can be identified as none, minor, moderate to large. In the review process, the council felt that the proposed 9/4/2024 short-term rental zoning regulations had no or minor impacts on each of the seeker topic areas. As such, the CAC recommended a negative declaration and included several comments with this recommendation, which would further reduce the impact of short-term rentals on neighborhood properties or neighboring properties. As with all projects reviewed during the seeker process, if substantial changes are made potentially affecting the council's recommendation, the project is subject to re-review. This possibility was discussed during the 9/4/2024 meeting, and the town stated that if substantial changes were made, the town would bring the proposal or proposed ordinance back to the CAC, and that's in the meeting minutes. I put a reference there. It has come to the council's attention that several revisions have been made to the short-term rental ordinance 9/4/2024, and the council believes that the current short-term ordinance, which is 12/17/2024, before the town board is substantially different from the one reviewed by the CAC and likely does not meet the threshold for a negative declaration. Consequently, the council is withdrawing their negative declaration. Recommendation, yeah. We need to fix the words on this. This is just a draft. In particular, the removal of the hosted requirement and the extension of the unhosted short-term rentals to all districts, the removal of 1 dwelling unit per property, and the removal of 3 rental bedroom cap, and the removal of the prohibition of guests are substantial and potentially impactful. So essentially, what this part of the letter is saying is we went through the entire review process. We found key points that basically minimize the impact of short-term rentals on neighborhoods. We went through the whole seeker process, and we came to the conclusion that there was really a negative deck. But in addition, we did put some comments to further reduce what we thought might be some other impacts, minor impacts. Then what we have has come to our attention that this has changed. And because this has changed, and I list these items, that this no longer is the same ordinance that we looked at, and that it probably won't meet the threshold of a negative declaration. So we're going to remove our recommendation to adopt the ordinance as written. And we're primarily just talking about the 12/17 version, because if the old version came back, that wouldn't be the case. So then the next part of the memo just talks about why this is a problem. The unhosted short-term rental properties should be viewed as investment properties owned either by an individual or a group or an investor group. We got to fix the wording on that. These investors may not live in the immediate neighborhood or the surrounding community. As such, they are likely not to have the same vested interest in the local neighborhood or in Niskayuna. Unhosted short-term rentals are strictly commercial endeavors appropriate for mixed commercial residential districts, as set forth in the 9/4/2024 proposed short-term rental ordinance presented to the CAC board. unlike hosted short-term rentals, allowing unhosted short-term rentals in residential R1, R2, R3 districts is an insertion of a commercial business in a residential neighborhood with little or no benefit to the surrounding neighbors. And then I added, moreover, allowing unhosted short-term rentals in a larger area of the town will likely increase the availability of affording housing stock in the town. I made a change. We need to work that out. But what I wanted to say was we were concerned about affordable housing when the unhosted short-term rentals were in the CN and the RP district. And by expanding it to all districts within the town, that sort of makes that concern even more because there's going to be more impactful to a wider part of the town. So finally, the removal of rental caps allowing guests will increase the impact of unhosted short-term rentals on the community. With these changes, the current version of the short-term rental ordinance will fail to meet the negative impact threshold of 2 of the 18 seeker topics, specifically 17 and 18. Specifically, as written, the proposal ordinance is inconsistent with the goal of Niskayuna's 2013 comprehensive plan that any expanded commercial use in a residential neighborhood preserve the residential appearance and character of the neighborhood. Moreover, its adoption will likely result in short-term rentals having a moderate to large impact on the community neighborhood character throughout the town. So that's, the first one is question 17, the second one is 18 on that. And then I have highlighted here is just a question for the board because really what this letter says is that we are not recommending a negative deck to the 2024 version. That really only sits with the September version that we looked at. And then we talk about the likelihood that there are going to be impacts. And there's a choice here. Either the ordinance can come back to this committee and we can look at it again and go through it. Or if the committee felt comfortable enough having gone through it to basically say that we would give it a positive deck as written. I did not make that decision for the board. So I'm open for discussion now.
But it's only a draft, right? So the 1217 S short-term rental ordinance draft.
But that is the draft before the board.
He called for a public hearing on Tuesday.
Okay.
They held a public hearing on the code that you guys had made a recommendation on,
Okay.
and they received comments. Most of the comments were, thank you for looking at this code, but we'd still like an outright ban.
Okay.
And then they went back and taking the public comments and their own thoughts and feelings on the code, made some revisions. They were substantial enough that the town attorney advised them that they needed to call for a new public hearing based on the amendments that were proposed to the code.
That's a 1217.
Yes, the 1217. The new code revisions draft is going to the public for comment on September 14th at 7 p.m.
It's September?
No,
Sorry,
January.
January.
Yeah.
I don't know where September came from.
January
That's where my brain
14th.
is.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of dates here.
Yeah.
Okay. So have there been email comments? So usually for a hot topic such as this, there are a number of email comments. Has there been any?
Yes, I would say generally speaking, the public comments are that short-term rentals are disruptive. They would like to see an outright ban, but if they can't see an outright ban, they would like to see the code as adopted. One of the things they wanted to see change that was mentioned at the public hearing at the town board level was to take the minimum week. Right now, the code says that there's a minimum of 1 week duration of any rental and make it 2 weeks. And generally speaking, I think the public was in favor of limiting it to hosted rentals. That's just my summary of the public comments.
So, okay, they were in favor of eliminating the unhosted rentals.
Yeah, generally speaking, I think they wanted them removed from everywhere. They would also, member of the publics that come and speak, like to see hosted rentals not allowed, but the planning
Okay.
board, town board, trying to balance, the rights of people to be, and also if you're in your house and maybe you're having trouble making ends meet and you can rent it out for a weekend or two to help you meet your bills, like if you're in the house, it's unlikely that somebody's gonna want to rent it for a party. But if somebody's just coming for a union celebration or something, they just need a bedroom to stay in. That could be a reasonable way. It's not going to impact the neighborhood at all, and it might help that person
Yeah,
meet their rent. So, that was the balance. Okay, you can live in your house. You're a part of the neighborhood. The neighbors know you. If you need to rent your bedroom every once in a while, you absolutely can.
That's the
And in
hosted.
some situations, that potentially could be really helpful to the neighborhood as well, because suppose I couldn't upkeep my home, but I could rent the bedroom out for a couple weeks during the year and maybe paint my house and upkeep it. That would be, my idea of this being beneficial, the economic benefit. If we're gonna have short-term rentals in this unit, the economic benefit should be for the resident, not for a
Outside
investor
investor.
group
Mhm.
based in California.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the town board's rationale, for these changes? I don't have the resolution in front of me. Like, is it mentioned there? I'd like to learn
No,
more.
it's not mentioned in the resolution. At the meeting, if you watch the video, I have it in this tab. Where'd it go? Here it is. It is the December 17th meeting. When the
Okay.
resolution comes forward, I believe several of the town board members stated that they're trying to make the resolution crisper and cleaner and easier to enforce. Again, I'm just summarizing. It's probably better if you guys listen to the public comments yourselves and listen to the
Okay.
town board yourself. But if you don't have the time, my summary is the town residents want extremely strict regulation of the short-term rentals because of the negative impacts they have been experiencing. And the town board wants a crisp, clean code to be able to enforce. And the other thing I heard from the town board is that they don't want to create extremely strict regulations based on a single incident of like a bad actor type short-term rental in a neighborhood, that we have right now. So they don't want to create sort of a massive code over a single house.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, one is I agree wholeheartedly with the idea that it should come back to this council simply because of the significant changes that have been made to the one that we did review. And you did a great job identifying what the changes were. And also, since they're doing a public input on the 1217 version, that also seems to indicate that there's significant changes. So just on that fact alone, it should come back for review. Second point is whatever our decision would be on that, the changes in 1217, that should be discussed in a meeting here on the issue itself, whether we agree, whether we
Mhm.
give it a positive declaration or a negative. We should go through those based upon the updated or revised resolution. So and I would just leave it, or to be honest with you, I think that my first point is that's the reason it needs to come back here, is that it has substantively changed from when we saw it, and it requires a return to this council for another review,
Mhm.
and leave it at that.
Okay.
The pluses and minuses of the points should be addressed when we do the seeker again for the revised resolution.
Yeah, going through the questions.
Yeah. I think what you want to do, and I'm perfectly fine with your suggestion, though. I think there's a couple points you want to bring out is you sort of want to talk about what the basis of what this board made their decision on. So that's the front end. And you sort of want to convey that. You sort of want to convey that this process is an ordered process set forth by the state. So that's why that's in the letter, because there are definite things. I think we do want to say that we want to withdraw our negative declaration recommendation for the current 12/17/2020. It doesn't carry over. I don't know how
Correct.
we want to say
Right,
that, but
right.
it doesn't carry to that. 'cause
Yeah,
there's
it goes back to
substantial
start.
things. Yeah. So then the question that I have is, I think the back half of the letter, and I was trying to articulate where the area of concern was specifically, and I think it's this hosted, unhosted. Primarily, that is the big item right there, and the guests thing there. If we don't articulate where the problem is, then I think it becomes hard. It's not as it's. I think if you're going to say this has changed and there's a problem, I think you almost have to say where you think the problem is.
Okay.
Now, I'm perfectly fine with saying we want to have the letter come back and re-review it and do a formal review, because I think that would be appropriate, perfectly appropriate. And that's why I didn't put that in
Yeah.
the positive deck.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of sympathetic to where the town board is on this, meaning that that we're anticipating a series of negative events based upon the 12/17 resolution that would negatively impact the character of our community. That's a vision into the future I don't think any one of us has, nor can we ever have. It has to be a incident response and reaction. And I can see why the town board would want to say, look, we got to, if people want to rent it out and then they wind up having a party, well, it's a party like we would have in our neighborhood right now, and there would be a proper response. I know Vicky's not here, but to the Quiet Communities Initiative, there's a lot of things in my neighborhood that are very loud consistently all the time. And on that point, the character of our community is constantly disturbed, just on, just based on the machines that are coming through on a regular basis. So, but I don't want to use what could happen as a reason to bring this, I don't want to focus on what could happen. What I want to focus on is the due process. I think that is here. I do think there is an excellent point on the commercial property being in a residential neighborhood. I think that's to me, that's a no-go too. Regardless of whether that commercial property is a house that is turned into a wood shop, which we know happens.
Mhm.
People have businesses or take money to build things with loud machine tools in their garages all weekend. And so maybe that's an undocumented business, but it happens nonetheless. So I think that's the main reason I would focus on would be the idea of these commercial properties operating as businesses, as micro hotels in residential communities under under this kind of faux residential, business or residence. So anyway, now I would focus on that. I do get a little weary about judging other people's activities and declaring it outside the character of a community when some communities are loud and vibrant, and that is the character of the community in some communities. So.
Yeah, I certainly see your point there. Couple comments on that. The seeker regulation basically says the threshold is may have an impact, because let's say this went out to a positive deck, okay? The process is now we have to have a formal EAF they have to fill out an environmental impact or EIS. So then what happens is these things get vetted in a more formal way. So like, for example, if you could argue that this may not have a potential impact, or you have to document it, that would come out in the formal positive deck. A positive deck doesn't mean you can't do this. What it means is you have to do more work. So how would that play out? Well, it could potentially play out that you look at it, what happened in other communities and stuff like that. So that's how that would go.
Okay.
The other comment that I might make is that once a unhosted property got into a residential area with investors, even if you change the ordinance, you would not be able to remove that use
Mm,
because they would be grandfathered in.
got it. Okay, good point.
So,
Yep.
I think my preference is start slow and, start conservative and then move forward.
Yeah.
But I did look at some other communities. Let me just find my notes. I did look at other communities outside Niskayuna just to check this, and it was kind of interesting that New York City now has a change in their ordinance, and they now limit their guests per property, 2 per property, but it also requires the host to live in the property, and that wasn't there before. Portland has prohibited short-term rentals in non-owner occupied single-family homes. So there are other communities that have gone out there and sort of have tried to reverse this. So, cool. Go ahead.
Chairman, I would like to learn more about the background and the reasoning behind the town board action. Could we act on this in the next month's meeting after the public hearing is done and more information is available?
The problem that we would have is if the public hearing was held on the 14th, the town board meeting would be on the 28th. And it could be likely that this would be adopted. It is tentatively on that agenda.
It is also tentatively proposed to be moved back, though. One thing that we could do in the interim is we could say, like a shorter memo saying that, we would ask if the town board is choosing to move forward with the changes to the draft code, that they postpone it to February, because we believe it should come back to the CAC and have a new seeker review.
I mean, there's 2 things here, Ashok. One is the process that it should come back here,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the reasoning. I mean,
I'm not disagreeing, Chairman, but at the same time, opposing the town board in such an explicit fashion without really understanding the reasoning gives me pause. I would be okay with saying, give us an option to reconsider the EAF based on the new thing, and then the town board can vote on it in a February meeting.
the town board is not under an obligation to give us back because we are not the lead agency.
What does the planning board think about all this?
They didn't really have a public discussion about the changes because they're also a recommendation agency. but the planning board had a split vote on their recommendation to the town board because they did not think the code was strict enough. And arguably the changes make it less strict. When I brought it up to the planning board, again, just a little Laura summary from, intuition and reading people's faces and small comments that they were not in favor of the changes. They have
The
not.
planning board was not in favor of the changes.
Right, but they haven't, issued a formal memo or anything. That's just, I let them know that there were changes, and my sense was that they were disappointed that changes were made. That is a Laura characterization of a meeting.
Okay,
Not anything in writing.
I'm sorry, it's been a long day. Could you repeat that Laura characterization?
That they
please?
were disappointed in the changes that were made to the code that they had recommended to the town board.
They, i.e. the planning board, was disappointed that substantial material changes were made in the code that they recommended to the town board.
Yeah,
Okay. Let's hear what other people say. Like Joy, what do you think? And Georgia,
So the planning board thought the changes were not restrict enough. Was that?
We're
when they
not
were
strict
making their recommendation to the town board on the original draft that you guys took action on, they had a split vote because two of them felt like the code wasn't strict enough. And they actually wanted to limit unhosted rentals. So the code that originally went before the town board, it allowed unhosted rentals in all zoning districts. So if you have a residential unit in Niskayuna, you can rent it as long as you're living in it. The zoning board members that dissented on the vote didn't want unhosted rentals to be allowed in all zoning districts. They wanted the code to be even stricter than it was
Okay.
written. And so when it went to the town board did remove the bedroom restriction because of a legal issue that has to stay out. But then they made those additional changes, which, my characterization, the planning board was disappointed that changes were made to the code that they had recommended.
okay.
The town board is allowed to make changes.
Mhm.
Chairman is saying, yes, they're allowed to make changes, but they're probably substantial enough that we think it should come back to the CAC for further review.
And,
On the
and
seeker.
Chuck, that was your point too. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
The fact that it made it, yes, correct. And the fact that it got to the point where they have to have, or decided to have another public input session tells me that it was significantly altered. So that's why I think it should come back here. Doesn't mean our book, or it doesn't mean that it passes or fails us. It just means it comes back here
We
for,
have to review it again.
just review it.
And again, I had a side conversation with Chuck on this, is that even if you went through this, right? I mean, and you went through this more formally, you said, no, there's a positive deck here. That would just require the town to do more additional due diligence here, as far as their ability to move forward. But again, we just make a recommendation. So the board is the town board is the lead agency, and they could choose to ignore it.
Okay.
And that has happened in the past where the CAC has forwarded memos to the board in situations, and they've either chose to follow it or ignore it. And that's
Okay.
certainly, their prerogative
Okay.
by law.
Joy, what are your
I
thoughts?
have another minor comment. Are we
Yeah.
expecting short-term rentals to have moderate to significant impact on the neighborhood character?
Yeah.
Or is it more appropriate to say have minimum disturbance on the neighborhood?
I'm just going by what the seeker is. The seeker is worded that way, so I was mirroring the seeker. So like, for example, suppose you had a house with 7 bedrooms
Right.
in your neighborhood, an old house, and that turned into a unhosted rental, right? So you'd have 15 guests there every weekend.
Right.
You'd have the cars, or if you had a neighborhood, let's say that there were multiple houses that were inexpensive, where someone would come in and they would rent out a whole block. Because there have been situations where these investor groups will come in and buy substantial parts of the neighborhood.
Mm.
And then is that a residential neighborhood or is that a commercial neighborhood? And whether that played out here, that's just speculation. It really depends on the locale, but if that is a possibility, then that may have a substantial impact. And I think our recommendation, all we say is with a positive deck, is that more due diligence needs to be done. And in fact, we'd like to know what the cost benefits are of maybe the new ordinance as opposed to the old ordinance, because we just don't know what that is. And now when it came back, we could vet that as well, as was mentioned.
Not having gone through like point by point like we usually do, I'm less inclined to say positive declaration. But if somebody wants to say the thing has changed so much that the negative declaration may no longer be appropriate and we need to review it again, I think that's worth considering.
Yeah, and that's all I'm asking.
Okay.
It's for that opportunity.
Georgia, do you have any comments on?
Yes, I'm falling on the side of the majority in that the changes clearly are significant enough to require another public hearing. So given that, I think that we can safely say that it needs to come back to our council for review again without even hinting what we're thinking. We don't have to say, oh, we think we need to change our negative to a positive. We just can say it needs to come back for review again because the changes are so significant, hold our cards close to the vest, and then take a hard look at everything and make the decision from there.
So if we look at this here, what I'm hearing is that up until the first part of the memo to where on the second page, and I'm looking at a printed copy, so I don't know if you actually have a second page. The paragraph where that begins with it has come to the council's attention that several revisions have been made to the short-term rental ordinance, and then we talk about it being substantially changed, and then consequently, the council is withdrawing their negative declaration recommendation. Right?
Right.
So, are people on the council okay with that the top half of this memo?
Yes,
There will be
yeah.
editorial changes, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I greatly appreciate the work, Mr. Chairman, that you put into this, and I agree 100% with the sentiment of that first part, and to bring it back to our attention, and then and leaving it at that. And I think Georgia has a great point. Why we want, or we'll review it. We'll start. We'll be objective, and we'll review the updated, significantly changed resolution as we would any other resolution that comes before us, and have our debate and discussion and decision based upon the content of the updated resolution.
Okay, so so from that top
I would
half-
just,
go ahead,
I would
George.
just second that you've done a wonderful job as well, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So we're okay with the top half of this letter. Ashok, are you okay with the sentiment?
So top half meaning
Meaning from the sentence, consequently, the council is withdrawing their negative declaration recommendation. The word recommendation is in there and above.
Okay, which paragraph is it on?
So he's saying all of that keep going down.
Okay,
Because this is all sort of like what we discussed when we were making the neg deck.
okay,
Keep going.
okay.
Yeah, so right there, he's saying ended at that paragraph there.
Consequently, the council is withdrawing their negative declaration.
And-
Okay.
Yeah, and then you
So-
can say, and requesting that,
Well, I'd like to go through and make sure that we can't add any other part of this letter. Okay, so if we can get agreement on that top half, so let's go down to the next paragraph. Basically, what we're saying is that the removal of the hostel requirement and the extension of the unhosted short-term rental to all zoning districts and the removal of the one dwelling unit per property, the removal, we got to take this removal of the 3 out because that's can't be in there, but it would be, and the removal of the prohibition on guests are substantial changes and potentially impactful. Are you okay with saying that?
Okay.
I don't vote, but I would actually just end it at the withdrawing the negative declaration recommendation, only because the removal of the one dwelling limit unit per property, I put this in my memo to the town board. That may be because it would limit people's ability to rent their apartment unit. So if, like, on Iroquois Village, one apartment unit on Iroquois Village was renting a bedroom, then no other apartment unit would be able to rent a bedroom. I'm just for, if we're just trying to be like a spear with our words, we really just want to make sure that the town board knows that the changes are substantial and it should come back to the CAC. That's just my recommendation. Entirely up to you guys.
I agreed. Like the pin here, the sticking point seems to be the hosted versus unhosted, and that should be the focus.
Okay.
Like I don't even fully I'm not getting a full grasp on the bedroom, the building inspector versus the other person making the determination. I don't have good clarity on that. And regarding the units, like Laura's points make sense to me.
Okay, so then we could rewrite that sentence and just say, basically, in particular, the removal of the hosted requirement and the extension of the unhosted short-term rentals to all zoning districts are substantial and potentially impactful.
Yeah.
And then I get the impression that the board does not want to go through and cite the seeker and all the stuff on the bottom part of the letter. Is that the sense I'm getting or not?
Yeah, well, I feel that, like I said, I think it's fine ending with consequently, the council is withdrawing their negative declaration based upon the evidence, the evidence above. I think everything below that are matters for the review of the
Okay.
revised. They're all valid, don't get me wrong, they're
Mhm.
valid comments, but they should be made in reference to the updated resolution as it's in front of us to be commented upon. I don't want to get into, or, I don't know if it happened, but I don't want to get into a debate about the specifics of the resolution before it's before us. I also don't want people to say, well, we're not going to send it to the CAC because look, all they want to do is, talk about how many people we can have in a house. That's not their job. The point is it's been significantly changed. It's going back to the public. It's going to go up for a vote again. It should come through us before it gets voted upon again. Even if it was, I just think that's the procedural process or the best procedure here. What the details are, we can discuss as we review it. When we declare whether it's a negative or positive declaration, we will give our reasons why. And I think these are preloaded for that discussion.
Okay.
It doesn't. None of the below require or is the impetus to bring it back to us. I mean, it's the evidence to approve or to give a positive or negative declaration because it has significantly changed. And I think that is indisputable.
Okay. Well, then I think
And if there is a response, if somebody comes back and says, well, no, it hasn't significantly changed, we don't think needs to go back to the CAC, then we can have the discussion as to why we think, what the significant changes are. But clearly the lawyers thought it was significant. or someone thought it was significant enough to bring it back to the public. And we are representatives of the public in this process as well.
Chairman and others, proposal.
Yep.
So, when we send a communication or whatever to the toning board, the paragraph on the second page that begins with, "It has come to the council's attention that several revisions."
Mhm.
The paragraph that begins with, we just send that one paragraph. It is short, it is succinct, it captures everything. It ends with, "Consequently, the council is withdrawing their negative declaration." Perhaps add one sentence saying, "We'd like the chance to, or the opportunity to review the new draft resolution," and just make it short, clear, and simple. Because even in the first page, the bedrooms are mentioned and the number of rental units are mentioned. Yeah.
Well, but I am going to disagree with you on that, Ashok. And I think what I was going to recommend was we're withdrawing our negative declaration recommendation and request that the updated ordinance be returned to the CAC for re-review.
Yes.
And then stopping the letter there. But I actually do believe that you have to talk about the process that went through for this ordinance. It wasn't just like, it wasn't hatched overnight. There was a lot of effort that this board put in. And I think it does the board a disservice. I want to convey that we had thoughtful discussions and prolonged discussions with the planning department in order to put this ordinance out. And I also think too, that we have to talk about, because I'm not entirely sure that the members of the town board really understand the whole secret process, and that this is a balance that we considered. So I actually think that is key important. So I actually think the first half of this letter is important, because I think the risk you run is if you just put that paragraph in there, they're going to say, yeah, they want it back, but it doesn't really convey the amount of effort and work and thoughtfulness that this board put into the document.
Okay, fair enough.
The only other point about the stuff before it's come to the council's attention is that it's the stuff that you guys used to make the previous recommendation. So that's passed.
Okay.
And then you guys are removing everything sort of forward looking, but he's explaining how the board came to a negative deck.
Okay.
Then, it's saying it's come to our attention that there's revisions that have been made. It's not really consistent with this negative deck that we just sent you.
Okay.
But we don't know if it's consistent with this negative declaration that was sent. So, here's what we did our neg deck on. Now we know there's changes. Please send it back to us.
Yeah, and I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I mean, again, I think that this is really part of our duty under our charge by the secret.
So do we need to make a motion to send a memo?
Yeah, I would. So what I would entertain is that we vote on sending the memo with the modifications, and there could be some minor modifications, because just reading this, there's typos and things there. But my recommendation would be is we take it down to the paragraph where we have the
Laura has it on screen.
last sentence, is, and put that last sentence in, and then drop the rest of the memo.
Table it for the next meeting. Yeah, I agree 100%. Oh, so you made a motion?
I didn't make the motion. I would like someone to make the motion.
I would like to make that motion.
Okay.
I would like to make the motion that we send the memo edited for clarity as drafted by Chairman Strayer to the town board
Can the planning board be copied on the memo?
Absolutely.
and CC'd to the planning board.
Okay, and is there a second? Someone want a second?
Second?
Okay, Joyce seconded. Okay, all in favor of the motion, vote aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Since there's no opposition or no, everybody voted aye. I think, Georgia, you voted? I did.
Yeah, she
Okay.
said aye.
All right, so then the motion carries. So we'll send this memo to the town board, and you will be copied on the final copy.
Yeah, I'll copy the CAC and the planning board.
Chairman, I wish to be excused. I have unattended kids.
Yeah.
I know the meeting is not formally ended.
They probably listed your
Yeah.
houses in there.
I appreciate you staying for this discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I actually, I know this is kind of, but I was home with my daughter who was sick all day, and I left her with a neighbor, and so I really need to go soon too. I'm requesting that we adjourn the Climate Smart Communities Task Force meeting until the next meeting, and then we
Yep,
can have the
I'm for
update
that.
there.
Okay.
Yeah. After all, this was sort of an added agenda item. It was not
Okay.
trivial.
Maybe everybody can read the NRI because I mean, you only had a little time to read it. Really read it, and then Ashok can do a presentation on it at our next meeting.
I actually think it's really good. and I
It
have
is
some
really
I have
good.
some really
Mhm.
like great ideas.
Yeah.
I'd like to share with you.
Sure.
And I think the maps were like phenomenal,
They're good.
Yeah, really, really good. And the pics.
extremely helpful to the town. And I'd like to personally thank you for your efforts in really taking the initiative here and moving this forward.
Oh, and if you guys, had comments, you could email them to me, and I could email it to Jim, and we might be able to update the draft for the next meeting too, if you had comments on it.
Okay.
Yeah. So email me your comments on the NRI. Yeah, and I'm sorry to have an issue, but I was home with her and I
Nope.
pawned her off to a neighbor, but I need to get home. To
So
her.
before we leave, I just would like to make a motion that we postpone the climate smart part of this meeting to our next meeting. And I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second for both the motions.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Hearing no
Aye.
abstentions or nays, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Yeah, it's quite a bit off